The moment I realized my marriage was a lie, my world tilted on its axis. It started like any ordinary evening, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above, the faint scent of jasmine from the vase on the table. I smiled at him, my husband, expecting the warmth I had once known, the gentleness that had drawn me to him. But that smile died on my lips the instant he looked at me with eyes I barely recognized, cold, calculating, and full of suspicion. "I know you're cheating on me," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the room like glass breaking. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some cruel joke, or maybe he had a rough day and needed to vent. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "I've never. You don't have to lie." He interrupted, stepping closer. His eyes, once soft and loving, now burned with accusation. "I know. I see it in your face. The messages, the excuses, the nights out, I know everything." My stomach dropped. A cold wave of fear and disbelief washed over me. I had nothing to hide. My phone had no secrets. My life was open and transparent, yet the man I had trusted with my heart, my soul, my entire being, now accused me of something so monstrous it felt unreal. Then came the belt. He grabbed it from the edge of the bed, wrapping it around his fist as if preparing for a punishment that only criminals deserved. "If I ever find proof," he whispered, voice trembling with anger, "I won't spare you." I froze, not because I was guilty, but because I saw, for the first time, the darkness in him. The man I married, the man I loved, had become someone unrecognizable. His threats were not empty. They were a promise. Behind him, standing in the doorway, was my mother-in-law, silent, watching, smiling faintly, satisfied. Her eyes sparkled with a cruel delight that made my chest ache. She had always disliked me, always found subtle ways to pit him against me, whispering doubts, planting seeds of mistrust, convincing him that a woman like me was inherently unfaithful. And apparently her work had succeeded. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as if mocking me. I sank to the floor, tears streaming silently, not knowing how long I could survive under this weight. I thought of my life before him, the dreams I had, the freedom I once felt, and realized they were gone, replaced by fear, humiliation, and the relentless anxiety of being constantly judged. In the following days, his accusations became routine. Every text I sent, every call I answered, every late return from work. Even the most innocent of gestures was met with suspicion. I walked on eggshells, terrified of the next false claim, the next threat of violence. His love, if it had ever truly existed, was gone, replaced by control, anger, and contempt. And yet, through all the pain, a small flame inside me refused to die. I may have been trapped in a marriage poisoned by lies, but my spirit wasn't broken. Deep down, I knew that injustice had a way of coming back. And if he thought that his belt and accusations would destroy me completely, he was about to learn that sometimes the woman he tried to humiliate could rise from the ashes stronger than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of the house, I made a silent vow. I would survive. I would reclaim my dignity. And one day, everyone who believed his lies would see the truth, no matter the cost. I had spent weeks living in fear, walking on eggshells in a home that had once felt like a sanctuary. Every glance from my husband, every whispered word from my mother-in-law, tightened the invisible chains around me. But it wasn't just his cruelty that crushed me, it was her, my mother-in-law, the woman who had smiled at me at family gatherings, who had offered motherly advice, who had pretended to care. Now I saw her clearly. She was the puppeteer behind the scenes, pulling strings with precision, her whispers and innuendos shaping my husband's perception of me. Every time I returned home from work, tired and drained, I could almost feel her eyes piercing through me, silently judging, waiting for a misstep. And she had trained him well. His anger, his paranoia, his sudden outbursts, they were all extensions of her manipulation. One evening, I noticed her slipping out of the house in a way she thought was unnoticed. She claimed she was visiting a friend, but her nervous glances and hurried steps suggested otherwise. Curiosity, that dangerous companion, stirred inside me. For the first time since my life had turned upside down, I felt a spark of determination, a desire to understand the truth behind her carefully constructed facade. I followed her discreetly, keeping a safe distance as she walked through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. She entered a building I didn't recognize, and through a slightly open door, I caught a glimpse of movement. Shadows, laughter, the faint outline of another man. I stepped closer, careful to remain unseen. My heart pounded not from fear this time, but from a surge of anger and disbelief. She wasn't visiting a friend. She was meeting someone in secret. Someone younger than my husband, a man who was familiar in our social circles, a man who often came to family events and smiled at me with polite charm. And she wasn't just talking to him. Their closeness, the intimacy in the way they touched, the soft laughter they shared, it was all unmistakable. I felt a mixture of shock and vindication. She had built a web of lies so intricate that even I, often cautious and observant, had almost overlooked it. But the truth was now undeniable, glaring at me in the dim light of that room. My mother-in-law, the woman who had manipulated and humiliated me, had secrets far more scandalous than anything my husband had ever accused me of. For the first time since the accusations began, I didn't feel helpless. I felt power, a quiet, simmering power that comes from knowing the truth. I pulled out my phone and began recording each stolen glance, each whispered word, each act of betrayal. As I watched her with that man, I realized something else. My husband's anger and suspicion were not random. They were carefully nurtured by this woman, fed by lies and half-truths, designed to make me appear guilty while she hid her own sins behind a veil of innocence. The injustice of it consumed me. They had tried to destroy me, to make me feel small and powerless. But now I held the key to their shame, the weapon they could never imagine. My fear began to transform into resolve. That night when I returned home, I looked at my husband not with love, not with fear, but with the calm of someone who knows secrets the other cannot even imagine. And in the silence, I whispered to myself, "They think they can break me. They think they can humiliate me. But the truth will shine. And when it does, no one will remember their lies. Only the justice I bring." From that moment, I began planning not in haste, not in anger, but with careful, deliberate thought. The woman who had added fuel to my fire would soon see her own flames consume her, and I would watch. Calmly, patiently, sweetly, the more I observed, the more I realized how deeply the deception ran. My mother-in-law had been a master manipulator, weaving lies into every corner of our home, planting seeds of doubt so carefully that even my husband, the man I loved, had fallen prey to them. But now the scales were tipping. The more I uncovered, the more I saw the cracks in her carefully curated life. I became a shadow, moving silently through her world, learning her routines, noting every secret glance and whispered phone call. At first it was just curiosity, but soon it became something else. It became strategy, survival, justice. Late one night, as the house slept, I reviewed the recordings I had taken over the past weeks. Her affair was no longer just a fleeting secret. It was a pattern, repeated enough times to leave a trail of undeniable evidence. I could see the shame in their secrecy, the thrill of being caught in something forbidden, and the arrogance of thinking they would never be exposed. But I didn't rush. I couldn't. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about anger. It was about timing, precision, and impact. I watched, I waited, I documented. Each stolen moment, each clandestine meeting, each whispered lie was captured, not just on my phone but in my mind, etched as vivid proof. One evening my mother-in-law thought she had the house to herself. She invited the man to our home under the guise of a family emergency. My husband was away on a business trip, unsuspecting. I hid in the shadows, my heart hammering as I watched them move through our living room, laughing softly as if the walls themselves could never betray them. I snapped photo after photo, careful not to reveal my presence. Each image, each recording, each moment was a piece of a puzzle that, once complete, would shatter the facade they had spent years constructing. I realized how ironic it was. The woman who had tried to destroy me had left a trail so obvious, so brazen, that I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. But it wasn't just about capturing the evidence. I needed context. I began tracking her patterns, documenting the times and places, noting the interactions with her accomplice. Every call she made, every text message she sent, I saved. Every financial transaction, every suspicious outing, I recorded meticulously. The picture was coming together, sharp and undeniable. I also began to understand my husband's behavior in a new light. Every accusation he had thrown at me, every moment of doubt and cruelty, was orchestrated by someone else. It wasn't love, it was manipulation, and that realization, though painful, was liberating. I didn't have to plead for his trust anymore. I didn't have to justify myself. The truth would speak louder than any argument ever could. As the days passed, my resolve hardened. I imagined the moment when everything would be revealed, when the lies that had suffocated me would crumble, when the world would see the hypocrisy of the woman who had poisoned my life, and when my husband would finally understand the cost of blind trust in deceit. I whispered to myself late at night, alone in the darkness. They think I am powerless. They think their secrets are safe, but shadows hide truth as easily as lies hide shame. And soon, their world will unravel, every betrayal will be revealed, every lie will be exposed, and I will stand unbroken. For the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. For the first time, I felt control returning to my life, and as the evidence stacked up, undeniable and damning, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the moment of reckoning was coming. Not in anger, not in chaos, but in the cold, precise clarity of truth. The day had arrived. Weeks of careful planning, of observing, recording, and preparing had led to this moment. My heart thumped with anticipation, not fear, not anymore. Fear had long been replaced by a quiet, simmering determination. Today, the truth would have its stage. I had agreed to appear on a popular TV talk show about modern relationships and family conflicts. My husband, blinded by arrogance and certainty, had dragged me along, convinced that the audience would sympathize with his plight. He was eager to display the picture of the perfect victim he had created for himself, a husband betrayed, a woman unfaithful. How little he knew. Backstage I waited, my phone carefully tucked away, containing every piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered. Photos, recordings, financial transactions, all undeniable proof of my mother-in-law's long, hidden affair. My stomach was tight, but my hands were steady. For once I held the power. The host introduced us, the bright studio lights illuminating our faces, the cameras rolling live. The audience applauded politely, unaware of the storm about to erupt. My husband smiled smugly, confident in his narrative. I returned a calm, controlled smile, my mask of serenity perfectly in place. The host began with the obvious question, "Do you trust your spouse?" My husband's head shook slowly. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I know she's been unfaithful." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not shame, not anger, but a quiet, controlled fire. This was my moment. I leaned forward slightly and spoke, my voice soft but carrying through the studio. "Before we talk about trust, perhaps we should talk about truth." The cameras switched to a wide shot of the screen behind us. I pressed a button on my phone and suddenly there it was. Photos, videos, and messages that exposed my mother-in-law's secret affair. The screen displayed her clandestine meetings, the stolen glances, the laughter, the intimacy she had hidden behind her polite, smiling mask. Gasps rippled through the audience. My husband's smugness faltered. Confusion and shock crossed his face as he realized the scope of the evidence. And then came the subtle, undeniable recognition. The woman who had poisoned his mind, the mother he had trusted, was guilty of the very betrayal he had accused me of. The host, equally stunned, paused before asking, "Can you explain this?" I turned to my husband, my eyes calm, unwavering. "You threatened me with a belt, accused me of crimes I never committed, and humiliated me in front of our friends and family," I said, my voice steady. "But here is the truth. The one who deceived you, manipulated you, and almost destroyed me was hiding in plain sight all along." I watched as the color drained from my mother-in-law's face, visible on the live feed from the hidden cameras I had set up. The audience murmured, captivated by the revelation. My husband stammered, unable to find words to defend himself, or her. I didn't shout, I didn't scream, I didn't beg for apologies. I simply stood, letting the truth speak for itself, my dignity intact. Then I smiled, not the fearful, pleading smile of a victim, but the quiet, triumphant smile of someone who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger, unbroken, and victorious. The host looked at me, awe and respect in his eyes. "It seems the truth always finds a way," he said softly. I nodded, my heart light for the first time in months. The lies had crumbled, the manipulations exposed, and the world had seen the real story. I had not only survived, they had all witnessed my victory. Walking off that stage, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I was free, not from my marriage, perhaps, but from fear, from humiliation, from the control of those who had sought to destroy me. And in that moment, I realized something vital. Revenge is sweetest not in anger, but in clarity, in patience, and in letting truth shine brighter than any lie. I had been broken, humiliated, and threatened, but I had emerged untouchable. And that, more than anything, was victory.